The diner was loud with chatter, clinking plates, and the smell of fresh food, the kind of place where strangers passed through without ever noticing one another. In the corner booth, a young boy sat alone, gripping his burger with both hands like it was something special. For him, it wasn't just food. It was a small moment of happiness in an ordinary day. A group of bikers walked in, their heavy boots echoing against the floor. Leather jackets, loud laughter, and confident stares instantly changed the atmosphere. They took over a nearby table, speaking loudly, drawing attention without caring who heard them. At first, no one paid much mind. Diners like this had seen all kinds of people. But then the laughter shifted. One of the bikers glanced toward the boy and smirked. Another followed his gaze. Quiet jokes turned into pointed comments, said just loud enough to be heard. The boy tried to ignore them, staring down at his food, hoping the moment would pass. His hands trembled slightly as he took a small bite. It didn't pass. One biker stood up, walked over, and without asking, lifted the burger right off the boy's tray. The table erupted in laughter. The boy froze, shocked, confused, and deeply embarrassed. His face flushed red as he looked around the diner, silently hoping someone would say something. No one did. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations died out. People avoided eye contact, pretending to check their phones or menus. The silence was heavier than the noise had been moments earlier. Everyone felt it, the discomfort, the injustice, yet fear and uncertainty kept them seated. That's when something changed. From a quiet table near the window, an older man slowly set his coffee down. He hadn't reacted before. He hadn't raised his head. But now, his eyes were fixed on the scene. Focused. Unmoved by the bikers' laughter. It was Chuck Norris. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply stood up. The room felt different the moment he did. The laughter softened. The bikers sensed it too, that sudden shift in energy when confidence meets quiet authority. Every eye turned toward him, waiting. No one knew what he would say. No one knew what would happen next. But everyone knew one thing for sure. This moment was about to take a very different turn. The diner itself was nothing special. A long counter, a few cracked leather booths, and the familiar hum of an old ceiling fan turning slowly above. It was the kind of place people stopped at while passing through town, a temporary pause in long journeys. The walls were lined with faded photos and handwritten specials, telling quiet stories of years gone by. The boy had been there for less than 10 minutes. He sat straight in his seat, feet not quite touching the floor, clearly trying to behave like an adult. The burger on his tray was neatly wrapped, and he had carefully unwrapped it, as if following rules only he knew. This was a treat, something he didn't get often, and he wanted to enjoy every bite without rushing. Across the room, the bikers had fully settled in. Their table was loud, full of movement, helmets tossed aside, chairs scraped back, laughter bouncing off the walls. They spoke as if the room belonged to them, unconcerned with who might feel uncomfortable. A few customers glanced over, then quickly looked away, hoping the noise would stay harmless. Chuck Norris sat quietly near the window, mostly unnoticed. He wore simple clothes, nothing that suggested fame or attention. A cup of coffee rested in front of him, untouched for a moment as he observed the room without judgment. He wasn't there to be seen. He was just another traveler, passing time, blending in. The tension began to build slowly, almost invisibly. The boy shifted in his seat, sensing eyes on him. He could feel it before he fully understood it, that uncomfortable awareness of being watched. He tried to focus on his food, chewing carefully, keeping his head down. But the bikers' voices grew louder, their comments more pointed, their laughter sharper. A waitress approached the boys' table, offering a quick, reassuring smile before being called away by the bikers, who demanded attention with loud gestures. She hesitated, torn between professionalism and unease, then turned back to her duties. The room continued moving, but something felt off. Other diners noticed it too. A couple whispered to each other. A man at the counter frowned, then looked away. No one wanted to get involved. It was easier to stay silent than risk confrontation, even when something clearly wasn't right. Chuck noticed all of it. He watched the way the boy's shoulders tightened, the way his hands paused mid-air, unsure whether to keep eating or stop. He noticed the biker's confidence growing with every laugh that went unchallenged. He also noticed the silence of the room, how discomfort spread, unspoken, from table to table. Time seemed to slow. The boy finally looked up, just for a moment, searching the room. His eyes met no one's. That brief glance said more than words ever could. It wasn't anger or fear, it was confusion. He didn't understand why this was happening or why no one was helping. Chuck took a slow breath. He had seen moments like this before, not just here, but everywhere. Moments where the outcome depended on whether someone chose to act or remain silent. He wasn't angry. He wasn't impulsive. He was calm, grounded, and aware. The setup was complete, even if no one realized it yet. The room was balanced on a thin edge between indifference and responsibility. All it would take was one decision, one voice, to change everything that followed. And that decision was coming. The laughter from the bikers' table grew louder, sharper, as if fueled by the silence around them. One of them leaned back in his chair, holding the boy's burger like a trophy. Another nudged him, adding a comment that drew more chuckles. To them, it was entertainment. To the boy, it felt like the room had closed in. He stared at the empty tray in front of him, unsure what to do with his hands. He folded them, then unfolded them, his fingers fidgeting as his eyes stayed fixed on the table. The joy he had felt moments earlier was gone, replaced by a heavy knot in his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply sat there, shrinking into himself. The diner remained frozen. A man at the counter clenched his jaw but said nothing. A woman nearby glanced at the boy, then quickly looked down at her plate. Even the waitress hesitated behind the counter, caught between concern and fear of escalating the situation. The bikers noticed the hesitation, and it only made them more confident. "Relax," one of them said loudly, waving a hand as if dismissing the tension. "It's just a joke." But no one laughed. The joke had gone too far, and everyone knew it. Yet the room stayed silent, weighed down by uncertainty. People told themselves it wasn't their place. Someone else would step in. Someone always does, until no one does. The boy finally pushed his chair back slightly, as if considering leaving. His eyes stayed down. He didn't want attention. He just wanted the moment to end. The biker holding the burger noticed and laughed again, lifting it higher, keeping it just out of reach. That was when Chuck Norris moved. He didn't rush toward them. He didn't show anger. He simply stood, slow and steady, as though he had all the time in the world. The sound of his chair scraping the floor cut through the noise like a signal. Heads turned. The laughter stumbled. Chuck walked a few steps closer, stopping at a respectful distance. His posture was relaxed, his expression calm. There was no threat in his stance, only presence. The kind that didn't need volume to be felt. He looked at the biker holding the burger, then at the boy, then back again. The room held its breath. "You know," Chuck said evenly, his voice low but clear, "there's nothing funny about taking something from someone who didn't do anything to you." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. One of the bikers scoffed, trying to brush it off with a shrug. "We're just messing around," he said, though his tone lacked the earlier confidence. Chuck nodded slightly, acknowledging the response without agreeing. "Maybe," he replied calmly. "But it doesn't look that way from here." Silence followed, real silence this time. The biker's grip on the burger loosened. He glanced at his friends, searching for support, but the energy had shifted. The room was no longer on their side. The attention they once enjoyed now felt uncomfortable. Chuck didn't move closer. He didn't demand anything. He simply waited. That quiet patience did more than shouting ever could. The biker's laughter faded completely. One of them cleared his throat. Another looked away. The tension reached its peak in that still moment, when everyone understood that the next choice would define how this ended. And for the first time since it began, the power in the room had changed hands. For a moment, no one moved. The air inside the diner felt heavier than before, thick with anticipation. Every eye was locked onto the small space between Chuck Norris and the bikers. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed louder now, as if the room itself was waiting for an answer. The boy sat completely still. He didn't look up right away. He wasn't sure if this was real or if the attention would somehow make things worse. His hands rested in his lap, clenched tightly, his shoulders slightly hunched. The embarrassment hadn't faded yet, but something else was there now too. Hope. The bikers shifted in their seats. The one holding the burger glanced around, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. The confidence that had filled the room earlier drained away under the weight of silent judgment. A few of his friends avoided Chuck's gaze entirely, suddenly fascinated by the tabletop or their empty glasses. Chuck remained calm, unmoving. He didn't cross his arms. He didn't glare. His posture was open, steady, as if he was inviting a better choice rather than demanding one. That calm made the situation impossible to ignore. There was no argument to push against, no aggression to provoke. Just quiet expectation. The waitress slowly stepped out from behind the counter. She held a tray in her hands, forgotten for the moment. Her eyes moved from Chuck to the boy, then back again. Other customers followed her lead, watching openly now instead of pretending nothing was happening. Whispers spread through the diner, soft, uncertain. "Is that really him?" someone murmured. "I think it is." But Chuck didn't acknowledge the attention. His focus stayed on the moment, on what mattered. The biker holding the burger finally lowered his arm. The motion was slow, reluctant. He placed the burger back onto the tray, sliding it toward the boy without meeting his eyes. The sound of it touching the table was quiet, but it echoed louder than any laugh that had come before. The boy hesitated. For a second, he didn't move, as if afraid the situation might reverse itself. Then he reached forward and pulled the tray closer. His hands shook slightly as he wrapped his fingers around the paper again. He didn't smile. Not yet. But the tension in his shoulders eased, just a little. The room exhaled. A man at the counter nodded to himself. A couple near the window exchanged relieved glances. The waitress let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The shift was subtle but powerful. The diner no longer felt divided. It felt united. One of the bikers cleared his throat. "Didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. Chuck nodded once. Not in approval, but in closure. "Then we're done here," he said simply. That was all. He turned and walked back to his table as calmly as he had stood up. No dramatic exit. No lingering stares. Just quiet resolution. The boy took a small bite of his burger, carefully, as if reclaiming more than just his food. The taste seemed to ground him. He glanced up briefly and caught Chuck's eye. Chuck gave him a slight nod, nothing flashy, just reassurance. Life in the diner slowly resumed. Conversations restarted. Plates clinked again. The ceiling fan hummed on. But the feeling in the room had changed. People spoke a little softer. Paid a little more attention. Everyone there understood they had just witnessed something important. Not a display of force, but a reminder of how calm courage can shift an entire room. And for the boy, that moment would stay with him long after the meal was finished. For a few minutes, it seemed like everything had gone back to normal. Chuck sat at his table again, his coffee now cold, his attention quietly drifting back to the window. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked like a small, forgettable moment, a man speaking up, a situation diffused, and life moving on. But inside the diner, something deeper was unfolding. The boy took another bite of his burger, slower this time. The initial shock had faded, replaced by a cautious sense of safety. He glanced around the room again, and this time, he noticed something different. People were looking at him. Not with pity. Not with awkward sympathy. But with quiet respect. The waitress returned to his table and gently placed a fresh basket of fries beside his tray. "On the house," she said softly, offering a warm smile. The boy looked up, surprised. He nodded, unsure what to say, but the gesture meant more than the food itself. It was acknowledgement. It was reassurance that what had happened wasn't his fault. At the biker's table, the mood had completely shifted. The laughter was gone. Their voices were low now, restrained. One of them stared into his drink, turning the glass slowly in his hand. Another leaned back, arms crossed, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. The confidence they'd carried earlier had drained away, replaced by discomfort. That was the twist no one expected. There was no dramatic confrontation. No loud apology. No public argument. Instead, there was something far more powerful: awareness. The bikers were suddenly aware of how they looked, how their actions had landed, and how quickly the room had turned against them without a single raised voice. One of them finally stood up. The sound of the chair scraping the floor drew attention again. For a brief moment, tension flickered, but it didn't rise. The biker walked toward the counter, paid the bill, and nodded stiffly at the waitress. On his way back, he paused near the boys' table. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply set a folded bill on the edge of the table, next to the tray, and walked away. The boy stared at the money, confused. He looked toward Chuck instinctively, as if seeking permission or understanding. Chuck met his gaze and gave a small nod, not telling him what to do, just letting him know he was seen. That was the real reveal. The power in the moment didn't come from intimidation or reputation. It came from restraint. From someone choosing calm over chaos, dignity over dominance. Chuck never introduced himself. He never demanded recognition. Most people in the diner still didn't fully realize who he was. And that made it matter even more. The lesson wasn't about fame stepping in to save the day. It was about one person deciding that silence wasn't acceptable. As the bikers left, the door swinging shut behind them, the diner felt lighter. Brighter. The boy finished his meal without rushing now, no longer shrinking into himself. He sat taller, more confident, as if something invisible had shifted inside him. Chuck finished his coffee, stood up, and prepared to leave. As he passed the boys' table, he stopped briefly and spoke quietly, just loud enough to be heard. "Never let anyone make you feel small," he said. "You matter." The boy nodded, holding those words close. That was the twist no one expected, not a dramatic ending, but a lasting one. A moment that would stay with everyone in that diner long after the chairs were empty and the plates were cleared. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Plates were cleared. New customers walked in, unaware of what had happened just moments earlier. The ceiling fan continued its steady hum, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air again. On the surface, it looked like an ordinary day had resumed. But for those who witnessed the moment, something had changed. The boy sat quietly, finishing his meal without fear now. Each bite felt different, not because the food tasted better, but because the weight he had felt earlier was gone. He wasn't rushed anymore. He wasn't watching the door or the biker's table. He was present. Comfortable. That was the first lesson. Sometimes, the biggest impact isn't in what's said loudly, but in what's restored quietly, a sense of safety, dignity, and belonging. Across the room, a few customers exchanged glances and small nods. No one needed to talk about it. The message had already landed. Silence, they realized, carries responsibility. Watching something wrong happen and doing nothing is still a choice, and not always the right one. Chuck Norris stepped outside into the daylight, the door closing softly behind him. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't look back. To him, the moment was finished. But the lesson it left behind was only beginning. Inside, the waitress paused at the boys' table once more. "You okay?" she asked gently. The boy nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She smiled. "Good." That brief exchange mattered. It reinforced what the moment had taught, that kindness doesn't need to be grand to be powerful. Often, it's the small gestures that stay with us the longest. The lesson spread quietly through the diner. A man at the counter thought about times he'd stayed silent when he shouldn't have. A couple near the window talked softly about teaching their children to stand up for others, even when it's uncomfortable. The moment had planted a seed, not of anger, but of awareness. And that was the deeper resolution. The story wasn't about bikers or a stolen burger anymore. It was about courage without aggression, strength without cruelty, authority without ego. For the boy, the lesson would grow with him. He wouldn't remember the faces of the bikers forever, but he would remember how it felt when someone chose to stand up for him, calmly, confidently, without making him feel weak. That memory would shape how he treated others. And for everyone else, the moment served as a reminder. You don't need to be famous, loud, or physically imposing to make a difference. You just need to be willing to act with integrity when it matters. As the day moved on, the diner faded back into the background of people's lives, just another stop on the road. But the values shown there lingered, carried forward by those who witnessed them. That's how real change happens. Not through dramatic confrontations, but through quiet decisions that ripple outward. Through moments where respect is restored, dignity is protected, and humanity is chosen over fear. The resolution wasn't flashy. It was meaningful. And that made it powerful. Moments like this don't always make the news. There were no flashing cameras in that diner. No headlines waiting outside. No one uploaded a clip in real time. And yet, for the people who were there, it was a moment they would remember far longer than any viral video. Because it wasn't about spectacle. It was about choice. Each person in that room had faced a quiet decision, to look away or to look closer, to stay silent or to acknowledge what was happening. And while one man chose to act, everyone else walked away with something to think about. That's what makes stories like this powerful. Not the presence of a well-known name, but the reminder that situations like this happen every day, everywhere. In restaurants, in schools, on buses, online. Someone is always watching to see who will speak up, and who won't. The boy didn't ask to be a lesson for anyone. He just wanted to enjoy a simple meal. Yet through no fault of his own, he became the center of a moment that exposed something deeper about human behavior. How quickly cruelty can appear, and how powerful calm courage can be when it meets it. Chuck Norris didn't give a speech. He didn't lecture the room. He didn't shame anyone publicly. And that's exactly why it worked. The strength in that moment came from restraint. From dignity. From choosing to de-escalate instead of dominate. That's a kind of power we don't talk about enough, especially in a world that often celebrates loud reactions over thoughtful ones. So here's the real question this story leaves us with. What would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, hoping someone else would step in? Would you have looked away to avoid discomfort? Or would you have found a calm, respectful way to make a difference? There's no perfect answer, but there is an honest one. And that honesty matters. Because most of us won't face moments like this with an audience watching. We'll face them quietly, unexpectedly, when no one is prepared and no script exists. Those are the moments that reveal who we really are. If this story made you pause, even for a second, then it did its job. If it reminded you to speak up when something feels wrong, then it mattered. And if it encouraged you to choose calm strength over silence, then it's already making a difference. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this, where someone stood up without shouting, without anger, and changed the outcome? Or have you ever wished you'd spoken up, but didn't? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might be the one someone else needs to read today. If you believe that respect is powerful, if you believe that dignity should always be defended, and if you believe that calm courage can change a room, type respect in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, stories that remind us of empathy, responsibility, and quiet strength, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep sharing moments that go beyond drama and focus on meaning. Because at the end of the day, real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about standing firm without becoming what you're standing against. Thanks for watching. And remember, the smallest action, taken at the right moment, can leave the biggest impact.